Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and politics. We're broadcast on KGBT Channel 26 and its companion website, wichitachannels.com. You may know me from my blog, The Voice for Liberty, at wichitaliberty.org, where the motto is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. So I do mostly try to cover just Wichita, Sedgwick County, and Kansas, although, sometimes there's national news we just have to take a look at. I try to cover things that may not be covered by the Wichita Eagle or other television or radio stations, except maybe for Joseph Ashby, or if we do cover the same news, I'll be doing it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty, as these are the things that are important, and these are the things that are so often under attack by our governments, be it federal, state, and local. So please visit wichitaliberty.org. There you can subscribe to the email newsletter I send out 2 or 3 times a week. And if you want to contact me, you can find my email address and telephone there, or it's pretty simple to remember, bob.weeks@gmail.com. Last week we saw Amanda BillyRock illustrate Chapter 4 of Henry Hazlitt's book, Economics in One Lesson. The title of that chapter was Public Works Mean Taxes. Now we're always told by government leaders that government spending is necessary to put people to work. That was the argument made for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, better known as the stimulus bill passed right after Barack Obama became president. But we need to think, how is that stimulus spending paid for? Because the money used to pay for it is not available for other spending or investment. Instead, it was captured and redirected according to the wishes of Congress and the executive branch and all the regulatory agencies. So you may be thinking at this time, what difference really does it make who spends money? Is there a difference between people spending their own money and government spending the same money that it obtained from the people through taxation? Well, there is a difference, very much so. It's the difference between voluntary and coerced transaction. Happy, as we saw Mandy BillyRock call it last week. It's the difference between the wealth created when 2 parties trade voluntarily with each other, contrasted with the harm that is done when property is stolen. We need to remember that people voluntarily engage in trade with others because each person feels they will be better off after the trade. But that's not the case with government spending. Now, when talking about public works, such as a bridge, Hazlitt makes a distinction between bridges that are truly needed and a bridge that might be built primarily to provide employment, in his own words. But I think there's a bit of a problem here. How do we tell the difference between the two? How can we distinguish between a public works project that is truly needed and one that is undertaken mostly as a jobs project? Well, Hazlitt provides this criteria. Is the bridge even more necessary than the things for which the taxpayers would have spent their money if it had not been taxed away from them? And that's precisely true. It's the right answer. But I wonder, how does government know how individual taxpayers value things? That's a problem, I think, because each person values things differently than others. Now, one solution that we sometimes use is to put the issue to a popular vote. This happened in Sedgwick County in November 2004 when voters were asked to approve a 1-cent increase in the sales tax for 30 months, 2.5 years, to pay for a new multi-purpose arena in downtown Wichita. That tax was approved, and we see the results today in the form of the Instrust Bank Arena. That sales tax measure passed by a margin of 52% to 48%. So we can deduce, I think, that 52 out of every 100 voters valued the arena more than the alternative use of their money. But what about the other 48 out of every 100 voters? They made the opposite decision, that they did not value a new arena as much as whatever else they could do with their money. Here's what we need to consider. Who made the correct decision? Those who voted yes or those who voted no? Well, the answer is each group of voters made the correct decision for them, that is. But due to the miracle, or shall we say the tyranny of democracy and majority rule, everyone has to accept and live by the same decision. Oh, and this was described as a big thing for Wichita, a huge win. Rhonda Holman, on the editorial page of the Wichita Eagle, wrote about the passage of the sales tax that she said, "This is really something to cheer, a triumph of optimism and leadership." And in the same newspaper, columnist Mark McCormick editorialized, "It was, on a very small scale, our pioneering history repeating itself." He went on to mention our famous entrepreneurs and aerospace industry pioneers. Although he explicitly denied comparing the building of a downtown arena to the genius of Walter Beach and Clyde Cessna, he predicted that the downtown arena would somehow lead to a rebirth of Wichita. Now, what I think McCormick didn't recognize is that the people who in the past made Wichita great were people working as individuals and in voluntary associations with others, other people such as their investors and employees. But now, when we look to get something done, many people look first to the government for some sort of public-private partnership, and we seem to think that's a good thing. The entrepreneurs and risk takers of the past were investing their own capital, their own sweat and toil. Our government leaders invest none of this. They simply tax and spend. And on this issue, elected officials didn't even make the taxing decision themselves. They let voters do that, thereby avoiding blame for the tax. Now, is that the pioneering spirit that made Wichita great? Is that what Mark McCormick meant? Is that the leadership that Rhonda Holman praised? And Rhonda Holman also wrote that voters wisely and generously chose to put their money where their community's heart is. Well, 52% did, 48% didn't. And I don't call it generosity when 52 people mug the other 48 to take their money to satisfy some sort of civic entitlement. And I don't share Holman's optimism when 52 people are able to overrule the other 48. I don't think that's very wise at all. But I digress for a moment. Let's return to Hazlitt's explanation of the problems with government spending to create jobs and prosperity. He writes, "I have deliberately chosen the most favorable examples of public spending schemes, that is, those that are most frequently and fervently urged by the government spenders and the most highly regarded by the public. I have not spoken of the hundreds of boondoggling projects that are invariably embarked upon the moment the main object is to give jobs and to put people to work. For then the usefulness of the project itself, as we have seen, inevitably becomes a subordinate consideration. Moreover, the more wasteful the work, the more costly in manpower, the better it becomes for the purpose of providing more employment. Under such circumstances," Hazlitt writes, "it is highly improbable that the projects thought up by the bureaucrats will provide the same net addition to wealth and welfare per dollar expended as would have been provided by the taxpayers themselves if they had been individually permitted to buy or have made what they themselves wanted instead of being forced to surrender part of their earnings to the state." That's the seen and the unseen. It's very easy to see the new bridge, or in this case, the new arena in downtown Wichita. The effect of the sales tax is concentrated there in a shiny new building. And the government uses its resources so we don't forget its majesty. For example, meetings of the Sedgwick County Commission announce upcoming events at the arena. But what about the unseen? That is, what about all that would have been done if money had not been diverted away from people through the sales tax? All that activity is dispersed throughout the county. In fact, the lost activity is dispersed throughout the entire country and maybe even the entire planet, as sales tax boosters told us that some of the sales tax would be paid by visitors to Sedgwick County. Our arena would be paid for by others, they said. Well, partially anyway. And don't you hate it when you pay high taxes in other cities, taxes that you know are going to fund their public works projects? But there had to be an effect from the diversion of money to the government project through sales tax. The fact that we can't easily find it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Now, after the vote in 2004, I found a research paper by economists who looked at employment in Pulaski County, Arkansas. That county used a 1-cent sales tax to pay for an arena in downtown Little Rock. And those economists concluded that in the net, considering both jobs lost and jobs gained due to the sales tax and construction effects, that workers in the wholesale and retail trades lost 60 jobs and service workers lost 52 jobs. There was, however, a net increase of 198 jobs in construction. Now, that sales tax in Arkansas lasted just 1 year and raised $20 million. Our sales tax for the downtown arena lasted 30 months and raised nearly $200 million. So I think the effects noticed in Arkansas would be magnified here due to the longer period of the tax and due to the greater amount of money diverted from people to government. So here we shined a little light on the unseen, the retail and service workers that lost a total of 112 jobs. We do have to remember that's a net figure. We probably can't tell which 112 jobs were lost, as jobs are created and destroyed every day for many different reasons. But over time, and in the aggregate, this is what happened. Jobs, by the way, are not really a very good measure of economic progress. To a business owner, jobs are a cost to be avoided. But to politicians, as Hazlitt told us, the more job it takes to do something, the better. And why not? It's not their own money that they're using to get something done. In fact, it's easy to create jobs if that's all we want to do. In a much-quoted story, the economist Milton Friedman was shown the construction on a massive new canal in Asia. Now, when he noted that it was odd that the workers were moving huge amounts of earth and rock with small shovels rather than earth-moving equipment, he was told, "Oh, you don't understand. This is a jobs program." His response, Friedman's, "Oh, I thought you were trying to build a canal. If you're seeking to create jobs, why don't you issue them teaspoons rather than shovels?" That's job creation, government way. We'll be back in just a moment.
Economics in One Lesson, written by Henry Hazlitt, Chapter 5. So let's say you want to start a business, a puppy selling business. So you've got your storefront, check. You've got all of your water and electricity and AC going, check. You have insurance, very important, check. And you have your puppies, check. Now it's time to hire some employees. You can currently afford $100 an hour in payroll. And when you pay your employees $10 an hour, you can afford to hire 10 people. Awesome. But the government has a bunch of regulations in the puppy selling market, and it costs you $10 an hour to comply with them. And now you can only afford 9 employees. You also have to get a business license and building inspections, pay income tax, pay property tax, pay corporate tax, and so on and so on and so forth. And before we know it, your ability to hire people has just literally been cut in half. Whereas 10 happy people could have had jobs, taxes means that there can only now be 5 jobs. People start businesses to make money, to make better lives for themselves, to take care of their family and their future. And it takes a ton of work to run a business. So the more money that's taken in taxes, the less likely people are to be willing to put in that much work. People who start businesses are really awesome people because it's really risky and really difficult, and you can stand to lose almost everything. And the awesome thing about those awesome people is that they create awesome jobs. But the higher the taxes, the fewer awesome people will be willing and able to bear the risks of starting businesses. And that just sucks. Because I really like when awesome people make awesome jobs, and I bet you do too. And in case nobody's told you today, you should know, you're awesome. Stay tuned for Chapter 6.
Well, as Amanda illustrated, taxes are a drag and a burden on the private sector. And again, you might be asking, what is the difference? Who spends the money, people or government? And as we've discussed earlier, there's a huge difference. I rely again on the economist Milton Friedman, who noted, nobody spends other people's money as carefully as he spends its own. And when government spends money, that's other people's money that's being spent. It's much better for that spending to be kept in the private sector, where people are spending their own money or perhaps money that others have entrusted to them and for which they are responsible. Now, we don't claim that all private sector spending is spent perfectly. People make mistakes. Investments in startup businesses don't always pan out. There is risk in the world, after all. But the private sector rewards those who spend and invest wisely with profits, which they can then reinvest. Those in the private sector who lose money go out of business, and, then they usually go to work for the successful spenders and investors. The point is, the private sector has a mechanism whereby capital migrates towards those who have been successful in using it. That mechanism doesn't exist in government. Government rewards politicians who are able to win elections, and as we've seen, that's often done by relying on special interest groups and feeding them with other people's money. Situation are deterred from starting new enterprises. Thus, old employers do not give more employment or not as much more employment as they might have, and others decide not to become employers at all. Improved machinery and better equipped factories come into existence much more slowly than they otherwise would. The result is, in the long run, that consumers are prevented from getting better and cheaper products, and that real wages are held down. It's important to remember that, with very few exceptions, innovation is mostly found in the private sector. Now, there are some exceptions, such as the United States space program. Spending billions on that gave us Tang, the powdered orange drink. But even that's just a myth. Today, NASA admits that the space program merely used Tang and did not invent it. We did, however, learn much from the space program, no doubt. But it was... Sure. Yep, absolutely. Well, we did, however, learn much from the space program, no doubt about it. But it was at great cost. And what would Henry Hazlitt say about this? Well, I think he would tell us to think of all the things that might have been done with all that money and effort had it not been diverted to the government. Would there have been scientific discoveries and technological advancements? Of course. It's likely, though, that the achievements made would have been different. Effort would have been directed towards the goal of advancing and improving life here on Earth rather than for making a trip to the moon. And under those conditions, who knows what might have been accomplished. The footprints on the moon, the space shuttle now on display in a museum, these are like Bastiat's broken window. They are easy to see. But what might have been accomplished had resources not been diverted from the private sector to the government space program through taxation, that is what we can't see. And at the local level, the Wichita City Council diverts money from the private sector in a variety of ways, through tax increment financing districts, tax abatements, community improvement districts, grants, forgivable loans. There's probably other programs I can't remember at the moment. All these programs generally produce something that's easy to see, usually jobs that government says are new jobs. And government then uses our own tax money to promote itself, such as through the groundbreaking and ribbon-cutting ceremonies where politicians and bureaucrats take credit for producing jobs. And in order to promote itself in the purported goodness of government, some governmental bodies even have their own cable television stations and recording studios, as is the case for the Wichita School District and the City of Wichita. But you know better. You know to look beyond the broken window, that is, to look past the jobs created or buildings constructed. You know to look for the things that are difficult or impossible to see. You know to consider more than only the short-run effects of a policy, and you know to consider the effect of a policy on all groups, not on just the special interest group that politicians and bureaucrats are favoring. And here's something that's really important. The special interest groups, they can take care of themselves. We need to be concerned for, and we need to fight for, the people who don't have a special interest group watching out for them. These being, for example, the people who lose their jobs or can't find jobs because of the diversion of taxes from the productive private sector to cronies of the Wichita City Council or the governor or whoever else it is. These forgotten people, the truly unseen, these are the people who would benefit most from a vibrant, productive private sector instead of from the expansion of government. And that's what we're missing in Wichita, as more of our economy is planned for us by government rather than by free people trading freely and innovating in markets. Well, that's it for this week on Wichita Liberty TV. Thank you for watching. I'm Bob Weeks. We'll see you next week.